Bayer. Science for a better life.
Hello and welcome to our insights during the WBC in Dublin. I'm together here with Dr. BarryBradford, and he will talk about immunity in transition cows.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about why the transition period is so important in a dairy production system. Our group and many other research groups focus a lot on transition cows, and there's a very good reason for that. If you look at a typical dairy farm, about 50% of the total disease incidence that goes on in the adult population occurs in just a short 1 to 2 week window right around parturition. So if we can improve the cow's health in that window of time, we can have a lot of beneficial impacts. We can improve the welfare of the animals, we can keep that cow in the herd and have a big economic benefit, and we should improve the reproductive program as well if we can improve transition cow success. So what I've drawn here is a little schematic that kind of goes through a lot of the new research that has been reported in the last 2 decades or so, kind of documenting some pretty dramatic changes that occur in the immune system and how it functions during this critical window of time. So I've mapped out here part of the transition window, which would be about 4 weeks before parturition through 4 weeks after parturition. And again, this easily encompasses the vast majority of these problems that occur in this window. In red here, I'm showing a general graph of the immune function of the animal, which has been characterized for both innate immune and adaptive immune functions, where people have taken these different white blood cells out of the cow, put them in a controlled environment in a test tube where we're not dealing with variation in hormones and metabolites, and shown that even in that controlled situation, if you stimulate these cells and monitor their functions, that function really seems to drop off in about the week before calving, and especially in the 1 or 2 weeks after calving. And probably not by coincidence, this is about the same window of time where we see really dramatic increases in the incidence of mastitis, metritis, and even respiratory tract infections. So it's probably the case that some of the infectious diseases we deal with in the transition period are simply due to the fact that the immune system, for whatever reason, is not functioning the same during that window. What's been really hot in the last few years is this other aspect of immune function, which is inflammation. So this is a part of how the immune system responds to an infection and part of how it turns on a response. And so one would think that if the immune function of the animal is decreased in this window of time, perhaps there would be less inflammatory signals. But actually what we see is the exact opposite of that. So in essentially all cows that we monitor, dairy cows that we monitor after calving, we see an uptick in biomarkers of inflammation. So in many cases, these are acute phase proteins made by the liver when the liver is exposed to inflammatory agents. And we see often a 10 to even 1,000-fold increase in concentrations of these in about the first 5 to 7 days of lactation, and in some cases in the less healthy cows that drags on for weeks. So what we know about that is that it is the degree of elevation of these inflammatory agents has been associated with the amount of milk that's produced in that lactation. So if they have a greater inflammatory response, that's linked to less milk yield. It's also linked to a higher risk of being culled from the herd. And there's also some weak associations with reproductive function. So if they have lots of inflammatory problems, especially if it's coming from the uterus, that's associated with poor fertility. So this is really trying to help us understand what's going on with diseases in the transition period, not only on the infectious side, but also metabolics, because this inflammatory status is also linked to a decrease in metabolic function.
Bayer. Science for a better life.